Just real quick before we start, I want to say that this has turned into a much longer guide than I expected, so I'm going to put some timestamps down in the description. If there's a specific part you're interested in, jump to it. But if this is your first time watching, you probably don't want to skip stuff because there's a lot of little tips that go into learning this swap. So I'll be right back. Hello, and welcome to my second, well, actually fourth attempt at a pivot swapping guide. I released one a couple days ago, and it was real bad. Well, I mean, it was all right, but it was rough, and I figured I could do a lot better, and maybe edit some stuff this time instead of just giving you one raw clip. So that's what this is. First question, what is pivot swapping? It is a difficult... Listen. Difficult. I mean difficult. It's not a fun time to learn. Difficult form of weapon art swapping, I guess you could call it. Pivot swapping is uses a little window that you create by starting an action, such as weapon art, locking on. It creates a little window that allows you to swap one weapon or one attack or action onto another weapon. And that's really all it is, but you got to do it real fast. I'll go into a whole lot more detail about it eventually here in a minute. The potential uses of the pivot swap, they vary a lot, and some of the things you can do in PvP especially are very crazy and potentially overpowered, but mainly it's limited by the fact that it's just, like, even for the simplest version of this, you're probably going to spend several hours learning to get it just one time on like a PvE monster like this, let alone doing one of the more difficult ones under pressure in PvP. It's a lot. So if you look at something in this video and you say this looks stupid and broken, consider the fact that probably nobody's ever going to be able to do this to you in PvE, even with... I even tried to macro it at one point, and I couldn't get a macro to work. I know somebody who got a macro to work some of the time, but... so you don't really need to worry about this happening to you, probably, unless a bunch of people watch this and decide they want to spend hours learning it. Alright, so speaking of difficulty, there are 4 main tiers of difficulty when it comes to pivot swapping, or 4 different types of pivot swaps. Each tier adds a few inputs, which makes it harder to do, but they also generally get more useful the more tiers you go up. The first 2 are generally used for practicing and learning to do pivot swaps, but not very useful in PvP. The first one is called the main hand unequip. The second easiest is the offhand unequip. The third easiest is the main hand swap, and then the most difficult of them all is the offhand swap. Alright, so what do you need to get started? You can start a pivot swap with any weapon, attack, or action that you can walk during. So you can see in this first clip, I use the Ring Knight Straight Sword and the Aquamarine Dagger, both of which you can walk during their weapon art stances. Just like that, and just like that. Another example would be swapping onto most spells. Most spells can be swapped because you can walk during the casting of them. For instance, you can see here, I do the Profane Flame, and that does just a crap ton of damage. You can also swap weapon buffs onto typically unbuffable weapons, such as my Crystal Astora Greatsword here, and it actually gains the spell adjust of the Catalyst, unlike the Bow Glitch, so it's actually a stronger buff. And also the Dark Edge, you can see you can swap any spell onto onto a weapon, or even another Catalyst if you wanted to. I'll go into what makes that potentially good and or useful. Spoiler alert, not too many uses for that one in just a bit here. And then a final example would be swapping it onto the Millwood Bow, which, as you can see, you can walk while loading it, which means I can swap it onto a blessed or poison weapon and get some kind of funny shots here. And then finally, you can actually swap weapons during an action such as eating a moss clump by pivot swapping, whereas normally you would have to finish the eating animation before swapping weapons. You might be able to catch somebody as like a bait if you go into it with one weapon and come out of it with another weapon. So, how to start practicing pivot swaps. The first one you're going to want to start with is the easiest one, which is the main hand unequip. Our goal here is to get to a point where you're getting into your inventory and unequipping your weapon fast enough without closing the menu. We're not going to worry about that part yet. Done slowly, it'll be tap weapon art, lock on, and unequip, and you're going to stay right in the screen here. The first thing you'll want to start practicing is recognizing the window that you have to do the swap in. And the best way to visualize it is to start out by seeing it without the window. And what I mean by that is tap weapon art and go into your inventory as fast as you can. And you'll notice that your inventory has that black or gray screen covering everything immediately. Now, try tapping weapon art, and I'm starting with the Ring Knight Straight Sword. I recommend you start practicing with the Ring Knight Straight Sword. You can do pivot swaps with just about any walkable action, but trust me, this one's a good one to start with. Okay, so when you want to start seeing the window, what you're going to do is tap weapon art and lock on, and then go into your inventory as fast as you can. And when you do it fast enough, you'll see this little window where the gray screen isn't there. There it is. See it? It's there for a flash. This window is the window that you have to perform a pivot swap in. And if done properly, you'll get a little waggle animation with your hands empty, and that'll mean you've done the full swap as fast as you need to do it. It should look like this. That little waggle right there that you're seeing means you've done the swap properly. If you can get to that point, leaving your inventory open consistently, that's all it takes to do the first and easiest pivot swap. You do have the entire duration of this little waggle animation here to close your inventory and do the rest of the swap. So when practicing, I would focus on the first part up until closing your inventory, because that's the part that needs to be done really quickly. The next step that I would take would be to try and hit the key to unequip your weapon or the button on your controller. I use keyboard mouse, so when done properly, it'll look like this. This is ultimately what you're going for a main hand unequip. From here, you can do weapon arts infinitely without running out of stamina barehanded, but it doesn't have any real uses. The one thing you can do with this swap, if you choose to, is still holding weapon art, you can do a strong attack R2 weapon art, swap to another weapon, and then hit R1. It'll look like this. And as you can see, now it becomes a somewhat usable swap. Alright, and now real quick before we move on to the next pivot swap, I'm going to give you a few tips that will help you avoid hiccups along the way learning pivot swaps. Things that you might be doing right and think you're doing wrong, or vice versa. So, let's start with what I like to call the parry out of menu. Basically, you're parrying out of menu, and it'll look like this. That's what a parry out of menu looks like, and it means that you're actually not doing anything quote-unquote wrong. Really, what's happening, you're doing the swap fast enough, you're doing it correctly, you're closing your menu. The only thing is that sometimes that happens when you use the Ring Knight Straight Sword. The way to fix it, it would be to step in any direction after doing the swap. So if I do this and walk, you'll never get that parry out of menu. So you're not doing anything wrong, but that's the trick to fix it. Generally, once you get this down, you're going to be throwing out the weapon art so fast that you won't have that problem. You're just going to go straight into whatever swap you want to do. But while you're learning, don't let that trick you. Now, one thing you might be doing actually wrong is going a little bit too slow. When you go a little bit too slow, you're going to get a little thud noise in your menu. It'll stay black and you won't get the unequip. It'll sound like this. That little noise means that you were too slow. If you're attempting to do it with a swap instead of an unequip, it'll tell you that you could not do this action at that time or something like that. I'll try to show that to you now. There we go. Cannot change or equip item at this time. So if you get either of those messages, that means you were just too slow unequipping or getting into your menu. Okay, so you've got down the main hand unequip. You're ready to learn the next swap. Probably the next step is going to be the offhand unequip. The offhand unequip is going to be done by two-handing your Ring Knight Straight Sword in your offhand. And technically, it's the same inputs as the main hand unequip, except for you have the one extra input of once you've tapped weapon art and locking on, you're going to go into your inventory, and this time you're going to go down one and then unequip. Other than that, it's exactly the same. It works exactly the same. And because of that, it is equally as useless and actually harder to do than the main hand unequip. So this one is a good step for practicing, moving up difficulty-wise, but is just as useless and more difficult than the main hand unequip. Done quickly, it'll look like this clip here, and then slowed down like this. And now, finally, after 12 godforsaken minutes, we get to the main hand swap, which is the one I use the most, and I think by far is the most useful and diverse of the pivot swaps. Again, the inputs are very similar for the main hand swap. The only difference is once you get into your menu, this time instead of unequipping, we're going to be going into our menu and swapping to any weapon. Again, any weapon will do this swap. But if you would like to get the burger flip off of the Ring Knight Straight Sword, you'll have to use the Profane or the Lorian's Ultra Great Sword. Most other weapons will either have no hitbox or they'll do damage, but they won't flip. So, done quickly, it's going to look just like this clip here. And then slowed down like this. Now, so far, all of the swaps that I've shown you have actually been the main hand swap, all the examples that I've done. That includes the Sacred Flame swap, the weapon buff swap, the bow swap, the item swap. All of those have been the main hand. So, like I said, I feel like this one is the most diverse. But, if you would like to take it to the final step and you get here and you want to learn the hardest one is the offhand swap. And again, the inputs are going to be very similar to the other three. The only difference this time is we're going to start with our Ring Knight Straight Sword in our offhand again, because we're swapping our offhand. You're going to two-hand it, and the extra input this time is going to be going down in our inventory to swap to our offhand weapon. Adding in this extra step of going down takes pivot swapping to yet another level of just stupid difficulty, because at this point, the amount of frames that you have to do the swap are almost equal to the number of inputs, if not equal. I can't remember exactly. It's basically frame perfect. for all 7 or so inputs that you have to do. That's a lot. And if your game isn't hitting 60 FPS at this point, the swap's going to be impossible for you. The earlier ones too, you're going to want 60 FPS to really have a chance at learning this. So console users, pick your location of practice wisely, and it's probably not worth learning because you won't be able to do it. Well, I guess maybe on the PS5, but elsewhere you won't be able to do it in real scenarios where you're not hitting 60 FPS. At this point, I like to point out that the game can only handle one menu input per frame. So even if you were able to hit the keys faster, it won't be able to do any more inputs than you were already doing for this swap. So at normal speed, it's going to look just like this clip here. And then slowed down, it's going to look like this. So you might be wondering what would make this stupidly hard swap worth learning over the one that's slightly easier and much more useful. Well, the answer is not a whole lot so far from what I can tell. The one use that I've been shown so far for it, and again, I have to admit this is not my idea, but this was shown to me, and the entire swap was both invented or discovered by Ryonic and Falco here. I'll leave a link to RyonicSoul's Twitch here if you'd like to give him a look-see. He's definitely worth following and watching his videos and streams because, my God, does he know a thing or two about this game that he could teach you. Anyways, the idea they had is the only place you can cast Great Magic Shield is on something in your offhand. So while you can spell swap any spell with a pivot swap, the only way to put it on a weapon would be to have the weapon in your offhand. So this is the use that they've shown me for the offhand. So as you can see, my Profane Greatsword now has Great Magic Shield on it. And if I put it on, you can see the stability of this bad boy. Doesn't show up, but trust me, I'll go test it on this crab here. It has all the stability in the goddamn world. Oh wait, okay, here we go. Yeah, so you can see 100% block, barely touches me. That's the power of this. You can put this on any weapon. You could put it on a PKCS. Oh, it went away there. You could put it on the strongest meta weapon, and it's ungodly broken. The challenge is that what you didn't see was me cutting myself doing about 5 attempts to get it there, and I got, I would say, somewhat lucky, and that's with hours and hours of practicing it. After spending countless more hours practicing the other swaps. So, very cool. Has a lot of potential if you could get it down, but it's just a lot, you guys. It's just a lot. So, I encourage anybody to take a swing at this, see how far you can get with it. It's a fun thing to practice if you appreciate just the fun grind of practicing weapon art swaps. This is the one for you. If you want something that's going to be a minimal effort for actual practical use in PvP, don't waste your time with this one. It's not going to be worth it for you. But anybody who wants a challenge, it's out there. Good luck. I'm gonna die to this hollow. I'll see y'all if I ever upload anything else ever again. Bye.